In the fall of 1976, Ben and I were going all over New York City with tape recorders, recording from payphones. We had just begun a very intensive process of recording mostly the crossbar ones and panels in New York City. Of course, each central office had a different sound, so you couldn't just record one or two. We really wanted to get them all on tape. In the process of making these tapes, we would always make a large number of calls to the special DID office codes that New York Telephone used, such as 780, 340, 578, and so on. These office codes didn't have any regular subscribers in them. Instead, they were divided among several organizations, each of which had its own private branch exchange. Now, New York Telephone almost always used step PBXs, the 701 type. In other parts of the Bell system, they used 701s as well, but there were also some others like the 756. That was a crossbar system that had the same basic ring and dial tone as the 701. You had to listen carefully to tell them apart from the outside. But as I said, New York was almost all step, which is kind of funny because that was the only step in New York City. Certainly you couldn't use step for regular subscriber exchanges, but these of course were private branch exchanges. For outgoing calls, they would dial 9 first, and then they'd get a dial tone, usually from a crossbar 1 nearby. The incoming calls were handled in a special way because these DID office codes were handled not by crossbar 5s or ESSs, but by crossbar tandems in New York. And there were actually 5 crossbar tandems in Manhattan which were exclusively dedicated to the DID service, which was called Centrex-CU by New York Tel. One of them was Amsterdam Tandem 2. It had a relatively small number of office codes in it, but in those codes were the PBXs for a number of different organizations. And the way they got their incoming calls was through the Amsterdam Crossbar Tandem, which is where you would go if you dialed 340 among other codes. And it would look at the 100 group that you dialed, and depending upon what the 100 group was, it would route it to the appropriate PBX. I happen to have some good quality recordings to 340 made from my West 73rd panel line, right across the street from the CO, and these were actually made with an open reel tape recorder, so this is high quality stuff. It's not compressed like the rest of my tapes, so you might want to listen with headphones just because the dynamic range is higher than most of these tapes, and the quality's great. I'll show you around 340 just as an example of what you would normally find in a DID prefix. For instance, if you dialed a non-working number, in the 340 10 through 12 or 14 through 1800 group, you'd get something like this.
This is a recording. If you are calling Conrail, please dial 340-3000. If you are dialing from a Conrail line, please consult your directory or call your operator for assistance. Thank you. This is a recording. If you are calling Conrail, please dial 340-3000. If you are dialing from a Conrail line, please consult your directory or call your operator for assistance. Thank you. This is a recording.
These calls, by the way, are going from my West 73rd panel to Amsterdam Tandem 2, and the communication of the phone number is actually panel call indicator pulsing, or PCI. This is a DC-only system for communicating a 7 or an 8-digit number over a wire line. It was originally used in conjunction with a device called a panel call indicator, given that name not because of the panel switching system, but rather because it was a device that showed the number you were calling on a panel such that the operator would see it. This was originally developed during the times when manual and dial offices were operating side by side, and if you were calling from a dial office to a manual office, sometimes the way that would go through is your CO would use PCI to talk to the panel call indicator at the manual office. The operator would see the number you were calling and connect you through. By the 1970s, of course, there were no manual offices left in New York City, but PCI was still being used from crossbar ones and panels to crossbar tandems. And until 1975, it was actually used to communicate to some panel tandems. So PCI actually lasted into the 1980s. It was an all DC system, as I said, that had 4 different types of pulses that it would send down the line, and it was 4 pulses per digit. On that last call, this is the sound of West 73rd Street PCIing into Amsterdam Tandem 2. Now we're cut through to Amsterdam, which is dial pulsing to the PBX.
This is a recording.
Most crossbar tandems that received PCI would not allow you to hear their outpulsing very loudly. That's why the dial pulsing is so low. But an exception to that was VZ Tandem 2, which if you PCI'd into it, the outpulsing was still loud, whether it be dial pulse or later MF, for its special pulse conversion function, which one of these days I'll explain. But I'm digressing. Here are some examples of other PBXs in 340. In the next 3 PBXs I call, each recording is more talkable than the last.
The number you have reached at Blue Cross Blue Shield is not in service at this time. For further information, please dial 490-4567. This is a recording.
This is 340-51-54 and 65-66.
The number you have reached at Blue Cross Blue Shield is not in service at this time. For further information, please dial 490-4567.
Up and dial 340-5897, which will give you the center's operator. That's 340-5897. If you are calling from inside the building, hang up and dial operator. That's O for operator. Thank you. At the Gramercy Welfare Center. If you are calling from outside the center, hang up and dial 340-5897, which will give you the center's operator. That's 340-5897. If you are calling from inside the building, hang up and dial operator. That's O for operator. Thank you. You have
The number you are calling has been changed. If you are calling poison control, please redial 340-4494. If you are calling the New York City Health Department laboratories, please call 340-4500. If you are calling the Public Health Research Institute, please call 481-0701. Again, poison control is 340-4494. The Health Department Laboratories, 340-4500. And the Public Health Research Institute is 481-0701.
This recording is really talkable. Goodbye.
The number you are calling has been changed. If you are calling...
Now, occasionally we would find an intercept line that had no recording at all, as was the case the day I made this recording to the 340-70s.
there. This is 34070, and you're on 7082, which rung until I tripped in on 7085. And now I'm going to hang up and redial on the line I'm talking to you from. As you can see, you were just flashed, and now I'm going to redial your line. Hi there. Now I'm going to flash a few times and hang up my line, then we'll hang up your line.
Now, when we were at those payphones calling those DID prefixes, we didn't just call non-working numbers, of course. We also called ringing numbers, and each PBX had a slightly different ring. Here are two in a row, again from the 340 exchange, and you'll notice that the ring is not the same from one to the other. Another thing you would expect to find dialing around in these DID prefixes were busy numbers. And happily, some busy signals were talkable as well. Now, of course, not all number groups were assigned in these exchanges, especially the 9s, which tended to be unassigned simply because 9 was used for outgoing calls from the PBX, and usually you would dial the last 4 digits of the phone number as the extension, so the 9s tended to go unassigned. Here's a 3409 number.
What number are you calling, please?
340-9901.
Thank you.
The number you have reached, 340-9901, is not in service. In area code 212, please check the number and dial again. 340-9901 is not in service. In area code 212.
What you've just been hearing represents the kind of thing you would expect to find dialing numbers at random in these special DID office codes in New York City. Well, one day, from a payphone, I dialed a random number beginning with 578-4, expecting to hear a recording, a ring, a busy signal, or maybe just intercept because I hit an unassigned number group. I went through to one of these DID tandems all right, and I actually went through to a step PBX in New York City too. But what I got was totally unexpected. Because this recording is a lot louder than the ones you've just been hearing, I'm going to need to put it in a separate segment. So in the next segment, I'll show you what I got, very much as a surprise, calling a random number in 578. That's next.